the Year 2 Theory and Methods section of this online series. Press pause as you add this as your title for this section, either on paper or in a computer. We're still looking at theory and methods for paper 1 and paper 3, but this time the subtitle is The Contribution of Action Theories to Our Understanding of Society Today, Part 1. Remember, a theory is attempting to explain something, and a sociological theory is attempting to explain society. We have looked at the theories that explain it from a structuralist perspective. Now we're going to turn our attention to the other side of the debate and look at the theories on the other side of the diagram. The examiner will use these terms interchangeably and assume that you know they all relate to this side of the debate. The action theories, if you like, is the general heading. You don't actually need to take them all as separate theories. Just be aware that they're all part of the same family, if you like. We can also add the word micro-theories to this as well. Structural theories are macro, looking at the whole of society, whereas action theories, as I said, are micro, focusing instead on those small-scale interactions. Hence, the pictures here show an individual creating society, pulling the strings on the action or agency side of the debate. Our focus is going to be on those individuals from this perspective. There are two different types of sociological theory, both structure and action. They're both trying to explain the world, but they're doing so from different perspectives. You may recall laying a quadrat over a piece of land when you're at school and looking at each section up close and in much more detail. The action theorist adopts something of a similar approach, but instead of counting blades of grass or stones, they look at individuals in lots and lots of detail, what they do and how they may create the outcomes that we see. This is a really useful phrase to consider when looking at the action approach, our ability to create the social world through our actions and interactions, and you should carefully consider this as we look at this theory. One of the key elements of action theory is labelling, something you are familiar with from education. But remember, for this section on theory, we firstly need to think of it in its general context, hence the definition of labelling in general terms. You should write this down in a way that makes sense to you in your own words. You might want to press pause as you do this. For instance, how might these people be labelled? What type of person do you think might be described if you showed someone else these pictures? You could even try it now. According to labelling theory, the label given has consequences. As we saw in the education module, the label, according to the labelling theorist, can lead to an educational outcome of success or failure. This, labelling theory argues, has been caused by the label given by the teacher. It is the action of the individual who has created the outcome, according to this perspective. Staying with the education application, these action ideas say the outcome is determined by internal factors. Hence, you could use this action theory idea to criticise structural theories that see external factors causing DEA, such as material deprivation, for example. As with all of the other theories, in order to explain them, you will be rewarded in the exam for your use of concepts. Think about what might be happening here. This is a concept we haven't done in education, but the principles are broadly similar. This picture is supposed to represent one of the key concepts related to social action theory, Charles Cooley's looking glass self. This concept is defined here, and you should add it to your key concepts list. The illustration is supposed to illustrate the looking glass self in action as well. This is the three-step process for outlining how Cooley's concept might work. Remember, we don't actually have a mirror in front of us, but the perception of ourselves is gained through the reaction of others, and that's what that picture is trying to represent. We imagine how we appear to another person, but we do so based on their, or our rather, perceptions of how they might interact with us. The perception is what becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And as noted here, the focus from this perspective and the use of Charles Cooley's concept of looking glass self is that the focus is on the individual rather than the wider social structures. Cooley's concept of the looking-glass self makes reference to the self-fulfilling prophecy, and this is outlined here in more detail, although it is a term you are familiar with. We've looked at this in education, but remember, you need to talk about the concept in general terms first before making the application to specific topics. One of the topics that is applied to, and one we don't look at, is health, but it provides a really good illustration of some of their ideas. So in this picture, the individual starts with an assertion of his health. However, as you can see, the interactions are building up. The perceptions of other individuals are causing this individual to redefine himself. His identity has been influenced by other individuals. Becker wanted to show how identities are produced through labelling. He uses his book Outsiders to discuss the development of a career, but in a slightly different sense to what you might be used to. In Outsiders, Becker makes reference to drug taking in the 1960s, a marginal group activity that could lead to labelling if people found out about it. If people don't find out about these things, they're not going to be labelled. But remember, the action is still the same. It's just whether people see it, realise it, and define it as such. The principle of labelling is applied to crime and deviance, and also this idea of a career. We'll revisit crime and deviance in more detail, but the principle is shown here as well. The label can lead to the development of a career. That career is based on the labels given. This can ultimately lead to what's referred to as a master status. The master status overrides all other identities, whether it's desired or not. The druggie here is how the individual is seen, rather than any of their other identities. This can be applied to criminals and deviants, as well as all other sorts of activities. How do you think this person would see and define himself, and how do you think others would see and define him? We'll explore some further action theory ideas, but please make sure that you can define labelling, the self-fulfilling prophecy, the deviant career, and master status before we move on to this part 2 of action theories.